Chris here from Nightshade Mini Studio, and today we're going to go over one of my favorite techniques for weathering vehicles and other large models, and that's salt weathering. Salt weathering is accomplished by laying down a base coat, followed by a layer of table salt, and then finally the top coat of paint. Once all the paint is dry, we're going to take a brush and remove the salt, and we're actually left with a three-dimensional paint chipping effect, since we've actually removed paint from the model. The technique's pretty straightforward. Hopefully you pick up some tips from the video here and can apply it to your own models. I wanted to thank everyone for the input that we received on the first video. Hopefully we've improved here. Again, if you have any questions, suggestions for improvement, or suggestions for other content, please send us an email at nightshadeministudio@outlook.com. Check us out on the web at nightshadeministudio.com, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/nightshadeministudio. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to receive the latest updates of new videos that we upload to YouTube. Enjoy.
Alright, so the models that we're going to use this technique on are some Night Lord's Legion drop pods. Now, as you can see here, we have the Dreadnought drop pod from Forge World and a few other infantry-sized drop pods. They've all been primed with Vallejo Surface Primer Black, and we're going to go in and we're going to use Vallejo Model Air Rust to hit the areas that we want to appear chipped and rusted. The base, toward the top of the doors, things like that. And as you can see there, I've already got one that's been done as just a quick example. So we're going to use Vallejo airbrush thinner and mix up our rust. Again, it is an air paint, but I do like the consistency to be a little bit thinner. I'm going to be spraying here with a larger tip than normal, just to get the coverage. And kind of a high air pressure. I think I sprayed this around 15 to 20. And as you're about to see here, they include caps on airbrushes for a reason. As you can see there, I spilled that all over the place and wasted some paint. So make sure you use your cap if you're going to be doing heavy spraying like this. So we're not going to be super precise. We're just going to get the general areas because it's going to be covered up with, we're actually going to reprime it with black, and then it's going to be covered again with our top coats. So again, not being super precise, and you could go in and be very technical with where you apply it, very true to life, but I really just like to do it where I think it looks cool. The base of the doors, toward the top of the doors, the fins, the places where I think they would have the places I think would have the most exposure to the elements. So we're going to go in, we're going to get a nice coverage there, and you would do the same with the smaller pod here. So once that's done, you're left with something similar to this. So this obviously looks very brown at this point, but it won't in the end. So this is basic table salt. Now you can use kosher salt, sea salt, really anything. I personally prefer the table salt because of the smaller grain. I think it gives a nice chipping texture. So we're going to take some regular water, just plain old distilled water, and we're going to dab that onto the areas that we want the paint to chip away from, obviously over top of the rust. So as you can see here toward the base, we're going to start to dab on some water and let that pull, and then we're just going to sprinkle salt liberally on top of that. And obviously we're waiting for the paint to dry because anything that the salt sticks to is going to be an area where we're actually removing paint. So again, kind of liberal with the water, just dropping salt into those areas over top of that rust. And then once that falls on, just tap the excess off. Anywhere that's not wet, obviously the salt is just going to fall off, and you'll be left with only the areas that you want to be rusted covered in salt. As you can see, the water dripped there a little bit, but that's why we went pretty liberal with the rust color, to make sure that if we did have some water running, it wouldn't give us a poor effect, and we wouldn't be left with the primer showing, we would still be left with the rust showing. So once that all dries up, and you do want to give it plenty of time to dry, you're left with this. And Now we're going to go in and we are going to reprime this. So we're going to take the Vallejo Surface Area Primer, Surface Primer, and mix it up with the airbrush thinner and spray this all over the model. So what we want to do is we want to cover those areas that we had the overspray from the rust. So spray directly over the salt. Basically, we're just going to lightly reprime the model. Now, obviously, this technique, one of the biggest limitations is that it is obviously entirely dependent upon an airbrush. You could not do this with a standard brush. There are other techniques that are useful if you don't have access to an airbrush. So we're going to go over and give it a nice thin coat. Make sure we get rid of all that rust color. And once we're satisfied with that, as I said, we had several, so we're moving on. So once that's dry, you basically have a reprimed model covered in salt. So now we're going to go in with the Vallejo Model Air Black Metallic. Same process basically as we did in the with the Night Lord's Legion Marine in the previous video. So we're going to mix that up, and we're going to give this a full coat all over, just giving it some metallic flake. And obviously this can go on pretty lightly since all we're really interested in is the flake. You could theoretically use metallic medium to do that, but the black works just as well. So once that dries, we are going to start highlighting this. And similar to the Zenithal highlighting, we're just going to pick out the high spots with Vallejo Model Air Silver. And those high points, the corners there, toward the center of the door, the edges of the fins, those kind of areas. So just going through and hitting all of the points that we want to appear brighter. And capping off the top of the fins. And we would do that same process here with smaller infantry size pod. Just highlighting the doors and the edges of the fins, letting the overspray sort of give us that light source. Now once that's dry, we're going to want to hit that with Dull Coat because we're going to be using this Alclad lacquer. So that's been Dull Coated, got the lacquer mixed up, and now we're just going to spray the whole thing blue. And again, this is the exact same process we used for the Marine, just obviously in a much larger scale. And as I said with the Marine, that's what's so nice about this technique with the translucence, is it saves you a lot of time. As you'll see, once this is finished, we're not going to edge highlight it. We'll go in and we'll start doing the metallic details, the lightning bolts, the iconography, things like that. But basically that's highlighted. That's basically done. So we're going to let that all dry, and here's our pod. And as you can see, we still have the salt in place. I'm going to take a big brush, and we're just going to start knocking the salt off. And as you can see, once that's done, you're left with a rusted, paint-chipped, weathered drop pod. And some of that sticks, so you may have to use your fingers just to gently wipe that off. Don't go too hard to make sure you don't scratch the paint. With the lacquer, that's not as big of a concern. But with acrylics, you could still scratch the paint more than you intended. So that's pretty much it. We'll go in now with some weathering powders and some other things to finish up the weathering, but the rusted paint chips are complete.